You will agree with me that we know quite a lot about trade in goods and not much about trade in services. So I'm going to present to you some facts about services trade, and this will help you consolidate the theory that you learned. Okay, I just want to quickly tell you what a standardized fact is. It's often used in economics. It is a statement or a description that gives you the general impression about the data. So, for example, you can say that most African countries are resource-endowed. You know, it's a very broad generalization. It's a broad impression of African countries. So, but when you dig into the details, you might find that some things are not accurate. For example, if you start looking at African countries, say specific African countries, you find that some are not even resource endowed. Right. Now, I'm going to start by giving you a global landscape of services trade. Okay. It is the largest sector, okay, in the world. The services sector accounts for more economic activity than any other sector. And here we are comparing services sector with manufacturing and the primary sector or the agricultural sector. So it accounts for most economic activity. You can see from the statistics here, almost 70% of world GDP come from services sector. It is that big. Now you see in figure 1 that for developed countries, it accounts for even more than the world average. It accounts for 3/4 of economic activity or of GDP in developed countries. Whereas for developing countries, it's about 56%. Okay. Just would like you to note that globally, the major sectors are finance, it's banks and so on, transport, telecommunications, energy, water supply, and business services. And these major sectors, they facilitate trade in goods. That's why they are indispensable inputs in many economic sectors, and they are burdened with trade in goods. Now, this is just what I explained. Share of services sector in GDP by development status. So globally, we say it's almost 2/3. The services sector contributes 2/3 of world GDP. This is for 2016, you can see here. Now let's look at, developed countries. We saw it's 3/4 of GDP comes from the services sector. Developing Africa is over here. You can see it's about 54%. The average of developing countries is about 56%. So it's not too far. Okay. The services sector is the main source of employment in the world. I just want you to note that, given how hard the services sector has been hit by COVID-19 pandemic. So the services sector is the main source of employment in the world. It contributes half of global employment, right? It is the main source of employment for developed countries, contributes 3/4 of employment in developed countries, and it contributes about half of employment in developing countries. Okay, now this is an important point. It will come again when we talk about global value chains, that services sector has played a very important role in reducing gender parity. Okay. Whereas in industry, which is manufacturing and agriculture, the share of women who are employed in those sectors has been declining. But in the services sector, and you see the global value chain, it's been going up. So services sector employs more women than the other sectors in the economy. You can see here it is 60% of women. Almost every 6 out of 10 women in the world are employed in the services sector. The services sector is a major destination for FDI. So most FDI, it's not in manufacturing, for example, it's mainly in the services sector. Remember, this is a broad impression. When you get into, for example, African countries like Angola, most FDI is of course in the natural resources sector. It's not in the services sector, but anyway. Now, the three major sectors are these: travel, transport, and business. And I would like you to know this because you will see they will feature when we talk about services trade for South Africa. So here we are, distribution of trade in services in developing countries. Travel, transport, other business, those are the top major sectors. You can see it's quite substantial. Their contribution is quite substantial. Okay. Here I just wanted to show you the case for FDI coming to South Africa. This is a paper I did. It was published in February this year by Studies in Economics and Finance. You can see this is sectoral distribution of FDI between 91 and 2014. Now, even though materials or natural resources sector, this is the biggest sector, okay? But when you add up the services sector, telecoms, media entertainment, high technology, financials, consumer services, they make up more than half of FDI that is coming to South Africa. So services trade is important for South Africa. Right. Now, note the differences. Different countries, they specialize in different things. Developed countries, finance, intellectual property, and other business sectors, whereas developing countries are mainly in travel and transport. And guys, when I mention travel, think tourism. We are coming to it when we discuss South Africa. Okay, there are major imbalances in services trade, whereas developed countries have got trade surplus, developing countries have got trade deficits. So there's a big imbalance there. Developed countries, they account 2/3 of services trade, developing countries, only 1/3. Right, this is the last slide. Just again, these are standardized facts. Developing country share in services trade is lower by 15% points. I mean, when you compare it with the share of merchandise trade. Again, guys, we will talk about regional integration, and you will see the WTO, and you will see that when it comes to trade in goods, that is merchandise trade, the tables are turned. Developing countries are contributing more than developing countries. So just note, we might lose, developing countries might lose or might not be at top of their game when it comes to services trade, but when it comes to merchandise trade, they are dominant. Okay. The largest exporter and importer of services is the United States. Okay, exports 15% and imports 10% of the total. Okay. Now, developing countries, who are the bigger players? China, India, and Singapore. Okay. And who are the major developed country players? France, Germany, and so on. UK, those are the main players. In Africa, South Africa, Egypt, and Angola, as you will see in the article that I will provide on services trade in Africa. So I'd like to stop here. You have a general impression of services trade in the world. And like I said, in the next section, we will look at South Africa, services trade in South Africa. Thank you very much.